I went to the final walkthrough of the mansion I was buying for my son. My 7-year-old grandson blocked the door. "You can't come in. Mom said this house is for elite people, not peasants like you." My son smirked. I left without a word. That night, he texted, "Payment still due tomorrow?" I replied, "Ask the elites." Next day, eviction. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I never imagined that buying a house for my son would lead to the most humiliating moment of my 65 years on this earth. But there I was, standing on the pristine marble steps of 800 Willow Creek Drive, staring at the heavy oak door of the mansion I had just purchased for $800,000, only to be told I wasn't worthy enough to enter. The morning had started with such promise. I had dressed carefully in my navy blue dress, the one David always said brought out my eyes, and pinned my silver hair back with the pearl clip he gave me for our 25th anniversary. I wanted to look presentable for this final walkthrough, this moment when I would officially hand over the keys to my son Trent and his family. After 43 years of working, saving every penny, sacrificing every luxury, this was supposed to be my crowning achievement as a mother. The drive through the exclusive neighborhood had filled me with pride. Towering oak trees lined the streets, their branches creating a canopy over perfectly manicured lawns. Each house was more impressive than the last, with circular driveways, 3-car garages, and gardens that looked like they belonged in magazines. When I pulled up to number 800, my heart swelled with satisfaction. The white columns gleamed in the afternoon sun, and the wraparound porch looked exactly like something from a Southern Living catalog. I had imagined this moment countless times. Trent would sweep me into a grateful hug, maybe even tear up a little as he thanked me for making his family's dream come true. Nora would finally soften toward me, realizing that everything I had done was out of love. And little Damon, my 7-year-old grandson, would run to me with that bright smile, calling me the best grandma in the world. The reality was nothing like my imagination. I climbed the steps slowly, my arthritis making my knees protest with each rise. The doorbell chimed a melodic tune that echoed through what I knew was a marble-floored foyer. Through the frosted glass panels, I could see movement, shadows of the family I had sacrificed everything for. The door opened, but instead of my son's face, I found myself looking down at Damon. His sandy brown hair was perfectly styled, and he wore a crisp polo shirt that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a week. But it wasn't his appearance that made my blood run cold. It was the way he positioned himself in the doorway, arms crossed, blocking my path with the determination of a tiny security guard. "You can't come in," he announced, his voice carrying the rehearsed confidence of a child repeating words he had been taught. "Mom said this house is for elite people, not peasants like you." The words hit me like a physical blow. Peasants. That's what my own family thought of me. I felt my face flush hot with shame and disbelief. This was my grandson, the little boy I had rocked to sleep, whose diapers I had changed, whose first steps I had celebrated, and he was looking at me with the cold indifference of a stranger, delivering an insult that cut deeper than any knife. Behind him, I caught sight of Nora. She was leaning against the archway that led to what I knew was the living room, her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around a crystal glass of what looked like champagne. Her blonde hair fell in smooth waves past her shoulders, and her smile was the kind that never reached her eyes. She wasn't stopping Damon. In fact, she looked pleased, as if this performance was exactly what she had hoped for. "Damon, sweetie," she called out in that saccharine voice she used whenever she wanted to sound innocent. "Remember what we talked about. This house is for people who understand quality, people who belong in society." My hands began to tremble. I gripped my purse tighter, feeling the leather strap dig into my palm. This wasn't spontaneous. This wasn't a child being rude. This was planned, orchestrated, designed to put me in my place, the place they had apparently always believed I belonged. "Where's your father?" I managed to ask Damon, my voice barely above a whisper. Trent appeared from the shadows of the foyer, and what I saw in his face broke something inside me that I didn't think could break anymore. There was no surprise, no anger at his son's behavior, no embarrassment at his wife's cruelty. There was just a slight smirk, barely visible but unmistakable to someone who had known him since the day he was born. My son, the boy I had worked 3 jobs to put through college, the man I had supported through every failure and celebrated through every success, was enjoying this. "Hi, Mom," he said casually, as if his son hadn't just called me a peasant, as if his wife wasn't standing there radiating satisfaction at my humiliation. "We weren't expecting you this early." That was a lie. The appointment had been set for 2 o'clock, and it was exactly 2 o'clock. I had been precisely on time, as I always was, as David had taught me to be. Punctuality was a sign of respect, he used to say. But apparently, respect was not something this family believed I deserved. "The realtor said 2, I replied, hating how small my voice sounded. "Oh, right," Trent shrugged, making no move to invite me in or to correct his son's behavior. "Well, we're just settling in, looking around. You understand?" No, I didn't understand. I didn't understand how the son I had raised could stand there and watch me be treated like an unwanted solicitor at the door of a house I had bought with my life savings. I didn't understand how Nora could look so pleased with herself while orchestrating my humiliation. And I didn't understand how Damon, sweet little Damon, had learned to speak to his grandmother with such casual cruelty. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. A gentle breeze stirred the wind chimes hanging from the porch ceiling, their melody creating an almost mocking soundtrack to my devastation. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sound of children playing in another yard, their laughter a stark contrast to the coldness radiating from my own family. "Well," I finally said, my voice gaining strength from somewhere deep inside me. "I suppose I should be going then." I turned away from the door, from my grandson's defiant stance, from my son's indifferent smirk, from my daughter-in-law's satisfied smile. My legs felt unsteady as I walked back down those marble steps, but I kept my spine straight and my head high. I had been dismissed from my own gift, treated like a stranger by my own blood, but I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. As I reached my car, I heard the heavy oak door close behind me with a finality that seemed to echo through my chest. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, staring at the mansion I had bought for a family that saw me as nothing more than a means to an end. The pristine white columns suddenly looked cold and unwelcoming. The manicured garden seemed sterile and lifeless. For 43 years, I had believed that love meant sacrifice. I had believed that being a good mother meant giving everything I had and asking for nothing in return. I had believed that family was sacred, that blood was thicker than water, that children would always love their parents. Sitting in that driveway, with the taste of humiliation bitter in my mouth, and the echo of my grandson's words ringing in my ears, I began to understand that I had been wrong about everything. My phone buzzed in my purse, a text message from Trent. "Payment still due tomorrow?" I stared at those words for a long time, feeling something cold and final settle in my chest. Then I typed back 2 simple words. Ask the elites. As I drove away from Willow Creek Drive, I caught one last glimpse of the mansion in my rearview mirror. It looked smaller somehow, less impressive. But then again, maybe it wasn't the house that had changed. Maybe it was me. That evening, I sat in David's old recliner, the leather worn smooth from 30 years of his presence, and let the memories wash over me like a tide I could no longer hold back. The house felt different now, smaller somehow, as if the humiliation of the afternoon had changed the very air I breathed. Every family photograph on the mantel seemed to mock me, frozen smiles from a time when I believed love was unconditional. I had always been proud of how I raised Trent. After David died 5 years ago, People in our neighborhood would tell me what a devoted mother I was, how lucky Trent was to have someone who cared so much. But sitting there in the gathering darkness, I began to see the pattern I had been blind to for so long. It started when Trent was in college. He had called me crying one night during his sophomore year, saying he couldn't afford his textbooks and might have to drop out. Without hesitation, I had dipped into the emergency fund David and I had built over decades of careful saving. $500 here, $800 there. By the time he graduated, I had spent nearly $120,000 on his education, money that was supposed to secure my own future. "You're investing in his success, Patty," David had said when I expressed my concerns. "A parent's job is never done." But David hadn't lived to see what came next. The wedding had been another test of my devotion. Nora had grand dreams and a taste for luxury that far exceeded what Trent could afford on his entry-level marketing salary. I had watched her flip through wedding magazines, circling venues that cost more than most people's houses, selecting flowers that were flown in from Ecuador, insisting on a 7-course meal for 300 guests. "Mrs. Henderson," she had said to me one afternoon, her voice honey-sweet but her eyes calculating. "Trent mentioned you might be able to help with some of the wedding expenses. Nothing major, of course, just maybe the flowers or the venue deposit." I should have seen the manipulation then. The way she never called me Mom, even though I had invited her to. The way she positioned herself as doing me a favor by allowing me to contribute to their special day. The way Trent sat silent while she negotiated my financial involvement in their life. I had written a check for $50,000, half of my retirement savings at the time. It covered the flowers, the venue, the photographer, and the honeymoon to Tuscany that Nora deemed essential for their happiness. "You're too generous, Mom," Trent had said when I handed him the check. But there was no protest in his voice, no suggestion that maybe the amount was too much. There was just acceptance, as if my money was his birthright. The pattern continued after they married. Their first apartment wasn't good enough for Nora's standards. She needed space for entertaining, she said, a kitchen worthy of the dinner parties she planned to host for Trent's career advancement. I had helped with the down payment on their first house, another $80,000 that vanished from my savings account like water through a sieve. Then came the emergencies. Trent's car breaking down, an unexpected tax bill, medical expenses when Damon was born. Each time I was the solution to their problems, the bank account they could draw from without interest or repayment schedules. $15,000 here, $20,000 there, each request accompanied by promises to pay me back when things got better. Things never got better, but the requests never stopped. I remembered the day Nora had suggested I sell David's tools. "He's not using them anymore, Mrs. Henderson," she had said with that practiced sympathy she wore like expensive perfume. "And Trent could really use the money for that business opportunity we told you about." Those tools had been David's pride and joy. He had collected them over decades, each one chosen with care, maintained with love. They were all I had left of the man who had built our life together with his own hands. But Nora spoke as if keeping them was selfish, as if honoring my husband's memory was less important than funding another one of Trent's failed ventures. I had refused that time, one of the few times I had ever said no to them. Nora's mask had slipped for just a moment, and I had seen something cold and calculating underneath. But I had dismissed it, told myself I was being paranoid, that grief was making me suspicious of people who only wanted to help. Now, sitting in David's chair, I understood that I had been seeing the truth all along. I had just been too afraid to believe it. The signs had been there at every family gathering. The way Nora would correct my stories, interrupting to add details that made me sound confused or forgetful. The way she would rearrange my kitchen when they visited, explaining that she was just helping to modernize things a little. The way she would exchange glances with Trent when I spoke, as if they shared some private joke about the old woman who didn't understand the world anymore. I thought about the Christmas dinners where I had cooked for hours, only to watch Nora take photos of the food and post them on social media as if she had prepared everything herself. I thought about the birthday parties for Damon where I was treated like hired help, expected to clean up while Nora accepted compliments from her friends about what a wonderful hostess she was. I thought about the times Trent had promised to visit and then canceled at the last minute because Nora had made other plans. The holidays spent alone because they were celebrating with her family, the anniversaries of David's death that passed without a single phone call to check how I was doing. Each memory was like a piece of a puzzle I had been too naive to assemble. Together, they painted a picture of a woman who had been tolerated rather than loved, useful rather than valued, exploited rather than appreciated. My phone rang, interrupting my painful journey through the past. Nora's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment, I almost answered out of habit. But something in me had shifted during those hours of remembering. Something that had been sleeping for too long had finally awakened. I let it go to voicemail. When the notification appeared, I played the message with trembling fingers. Mrs. Henderson, it's Nora. I think there may have been some misunderstanding today. Damon is just a child. You know how children can be. They repeat things without understanding what they mean. Perhaps we could meet for lunch tomorrow and discuss the house situation? I'm sure we can work everything out like the family we are. The family we are. As if we had ever been a family. As if I had ever been anything more to her than an aging wallet, a convenient source of funding for the lifestyle she felt she deserved. I deleted the voicemail without responding. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 9 times, its deep tone echoing through the house David and I had bought with our own hard work, our own sacrifices. This house was filled with memories of love, of partnership, of 2 people building something together. It was nothing like the cold mansion on Willow Creek Drive, where my grandson had been taught to see me as a peasant. I walked to the window and looked out at my small garden, where David's roses still bloomed despite my inexpert care. In the distance, I could see the lights of other houses, other families, other lives that I had never been part of because I had always been too busy serving mine. For 65 years, I had believed that love meant giving until it hurt, sacrificing until there was nothing left to sacrifice. I had thought that being a good mother meant never saying no, never setting boundaries, never asking for anything in return. But love was supposed to flow both ways, wasn't it? Love was supposed to include respect, consideration, gratitude. Love wasn't supposed to feel like a transaction where only one person paid and the other person collected. As I prepared for bed that night, I made a decision that would have terrified the woman I had been that morning. I was going to stop paying. I was going to stop sacrificing. I was going to stop pretending that their indifference was love and their exploitation was family. I had given them everything, and they had made it clear that everything wasn't enough. They wanted more than my money. They wanted my dignity, my self-respect, my right to be treated like a human being who mattered. Well, they couldn't have those things, because for the first time in my adult life, I was going to choose myself. The check I had written for the house was sitting on my kitchen table, ready to be delivered to the bank in the morning. $800,000. The culmination of a lifetime of work and saving and sacrifice. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for my bank's after-hours service. I need to place a stop payment on a check, I said, when the representative answered. As I gave them the details, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. I felt powerful. I felt free. I felt like the woman David had fallen in love with all those years ago. The woman who had been buried under decades of people-pleasing and self-denial. Tomorrow, the family that had dismissed me as a peasant was going to learn what it meant to lose their queen. I slept better that night than I had in months. For the first time since David's death, I woke up without the weight of obligation pressing down on my chest. The morning sun streamed through my bedroom curtains, and I actually smiled as I made my coffee. It was a small thing, but it felt like a victory. The peace lasted exactly until 9:37 in the morning. My phone started ringing while I was watering David's roses in the backyard. Trent's name flashed across the screen, and I could practically feel the panic radiating through the device. I let it ring. He called back immediately, then again. By the fourth call, I was almost amused by his persistence. Finally, I answered. Mom? His voice was higher than usual, strained with an emotion I hadn't heard from him since he was a teenager caught in a lie. Mom, there's been some kind of mistake with the bank. They're saying the check was canceled? No mistake, I replied, my voice calmer than I felt. I continued deadheading the roses, finding something therapeutic in the simple task. What do you mean, no mistake? The panic was fully evident now. Mom, we're supposed to close on the house today. The sellers are expecting payment. The movers are coming this afternoon. We've already started packing. I paused in my gardening and sat down on the old wooden bench David had built years ago. That's unfortunate, but it's not my problem anymore. Silence stretched between us, broken only by the sound of birds chirping in my neighbor's oak tree. When Trent spoke again, his voice carried that familiar tone of wounded entitlement that I now recognized had been there for years. I don't understand what's gotten into you. We had an agreement. You promised to help us with this house. I did help you, I said quietly. I worked for 43 years, saved every penny I could, and offered to buy you a mansion worth $800,000. And your family made it clear that I'm not worthy to set foot inside it. Damon didn't mean anything by that. Kids say stupid things all the time. The dismissal hit me like a slap. No apology for his son's behavior, no acknowledgement of how humiliating the experience had been, no recognition that 7-year-olds don't spontaneously use words like peasant without being taught. And what about you, Trent? What did you mean when you stood there and let it happen? Another silence. I could hear voices in the background, Nora's sharp tone cutting through what sounded like frantic activity. Look, Mom, can we discuss this later? Right now I need to figure out how to fix this situation. The real estate agent is calling every 5 minutes and Nora is what? I interrupted, upset that her plans didn't work out exactly as she hoped. She's my wife, Trent said, and there was something defensive in his voice that confirmed everything I had suspected. She's family. We're all family, and families work things out. I stood up from the bench and walked back toward my house, my sanctuary, the place where I was respected and valued because I had built it with someone who actually loved me. Family, I repeated. Tell me, Trent, when was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you visited without needing something? When was the last time you invited me to dinner instead of the other way around? No answer. I'll wait, I said, settling into David's chair and putting my feet up. That's not fair, he finally muttered. We've been busy. Damon has activities. Nora has her commitments. I have work. Everyone has commitments, son. The difference is that people make time for the things that matter to them. I could hear Nora's voice getting louder in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. Whatever she was saying, it wasn't pleasant. Hold on, Trent said, and I heard the rustle of the phone being covered. While I waited, I looked around my living room, really looked at it for the first time in months. Every piece of furniture told a story. The coffee table David had refinished when we were newlyweds and couldn't afford to buy new. The bookshelf filled with novels we had read together and discussed over countless dinners. The family photos that chronicled happier times, before I became nothing more than a bank account with legs. Trent came back on the line, and his voice had changed. The panic was still there, but now it was edged with something harder. Nora wants to talk to you, he said. Before I could respond, my daughter-in-law's voice filled my ear, sickeningly sweet, but with an undertone that made my skin crawl. Mrs. Henderson, darling, I think we need to sit down and discuss this rationally. You're obviously upset about yesterday, and I understand that. But we can't let a simple misunderstanding destroy everything we've worked toward as a family. Everything you've worked toward, I corrected. I don't recall being consulted about your family's goals. That's not true at all, she laughed, but there was no humor in it. We've always included you in our decisions. You knew we were looking for a bigger house. You knew how important it was for Damon to grow up in the right neighborhood. with the right kind of influences. The right kind of influences. Not peasants like me, presumably. What I knew, I said slowly, was that you found a house you couldn't afford and expected me to pay for it. What I didn't know was that you considered me too low class to actually enter it. Oh, honey, you're taking this entirely the wrong way. Damon was just being silly. Children say the darndest things, don't they? You can't possibly be serious about canceling the purchase over something so trivial. Trivial. That's what my humiliation was to her. Trivial. Here's what's going to happen, I said, surprised by the steel in my own voice. You're going to figure out your own housing situation without my money. You're going to explain to your friends why you can't move into your dream mansion, and you're going to do it without blaming me because I'm done being your scapegoat. You can't be serious. Nora's mask was slipping now, her voice losing its artificial sweetness. Do you have any idea how this makes us look? We've already told everyone about the house. I've posted pictures on social media. My mother is flying in next week to see it. Then you probably should have treated me with respect before you started making announcements. Mrs. Henderson, please be reasonable. We're family. Family doesn't abandon each other over petty disagreements. I almost laughed at the irony. You're absolutely right, Nora. Family doesn't abandon each other. Remember that. I hung up before she could respond. Within minutes, my phone was buzzing with text messages, some from Trent, pleading and desperate, others from Nora, alternating between fake sweetness and barely concealed hostility. I read them all and deleted them one by one. The last message came from a number I didn't recognize. This is what happens when old people get bitter and senile. You're destroying your own family out of spite. Hope you're proud of yourself. I stared at that message for a long time. Senile. That's what they thought this was. Not a rational decision made by a woman who had finally seen clearly. Not the natural consequence of years of disrespect and exploitation. Just the confused ramblings of an old woman who didn't know any better. I saved the message. Something told me I might need it later. Around noon, my neighbor Mrs. Chen knocked on my door. She was a widow like me, though she had the luxury of children who actually visited her regularly. Patty, dear, she said when I opened the door. I just saw a moving truck leave the house across the street. Wasn't that your son's place? I looked past her and saw that she was right. The small rental house where Trent's family had been living was now showing clear signs of a hasty departure. Boxes were scattered across the lawn, and I could see Nora directing the movers with increasingly frantic gestures. It appears they've had a change of plans, I said diplomatically. Mrs. Chen studied my face with the keen insight of someone who had lived long enough to recognize drama when she saw it. Are you all right, dear? It was the first time in months that someone had asked me that question, and actually waited to hear the answer. The kindness in her voice almost undid me. I think I'm going to be, I said, and realized I meant it. That evening, as I sat down to a quiet dinner for one, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Pride. Not the hollow satisfaction of paying someone else's bills, or the brief pleasure of being thanked for a gift I couldn't afford. Real pride. The kind that comes from standing up for yourself even when it costs you something. My phone rang one more time that day. This time it was a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, I heard Damon's small voice on the other end. Grandma Patty? Mommy says we can't live in the big house anymore because you changed your mind. She says you don't love us anymore. My heart broke a little, listening to this confused child who had been taught to weaponize his innocence. I love you very much, Damon, I said gently, but love doesn't mean giving people everything they want, especially when they're not grateful for it. I don't understand, he said, and for the first time, he sounded like the 7-year-old he actually was instead of the little soldier his parents had trained him to be. I know you don't, sweetheart, but someday you will. The line went quiet, and I could hear Nora's voice in the background, sharp and angry. The phone disconnected abruptly. I sat in the growing darkness of my living room, surrounded by the life David and I had built together, and felt something settling into place inside me. It wasn't happiness exactly, not yet. But it was something better than happiness. It was peace with my own decisions. And for a woman who had spent most of her life trying to please everyone else, that was a revolution. 3 days after I canceled the check, my world exploded in ways I never could have imagined. I had thought the worst was over, that I had seen the full extent of my family's betrayal. I had no idea how naive I was being. It started with a phone call from my bank. "Mrs. Henderson?" The voice belonged to Janet, the customer service representative I had worked with for over 20 years. "I'm calling about some unusual activity on your accounts. Could you come in this afternoon? There are some documents I think you should see." The tone in her voice made my stomach clench. Janet had helped me through the paperwork when David died, had assisted with setting up my retirement accounts, had always been professional, but warm. Today she sounded troubled. "What kind of documents?" I asked, though part of me already dreaded the answer. "It would be better if we discussed this in person," she said carefully. "Can you be here by 3 o'clock? I spent the next 4 hours trying to distract myself with household chores, but my mind kept racing. What could be wrong with my accounts? I had been meticulous about my finances since David's death, checking balances regularly, keeping careful records. I had to be careful. My savings were all I had left. The bank felt different when I arrived that afternoon. Or maybe I was the one who was different. 3 days ago, I had walked into this building as a woman who existed primarily to solve other people's problems. Today, I felt like someone who might actually have rights worth protecting. Janet led me to a small conference room and closed the door behind us. She had a thick file folder in her hands, and her expression was grim. "Patty," she said, using my first name for the first time in 20 years. "I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me." I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. "Have you given anyone access to your accounts? Power of attorney? Joint ownership? Anything like that?" "No," I said immediately. "David and I had joint accounts when he was alive, but since his death, everything has been solely in my name." Janet opened the file and pulled out a stack of papers. "Someone has been attempting to access your accounts. We have records of multiple calls over the past 6 months. Someone claiming to be calling on your behalf, asking about balances, transfer procedures, beneficiary information." My hands began to tremble. "Who?" She slid a document across the table. It was a phone log, and I recognized the number immediately. "Trent. Your son has called 17 times in the past 6 months, Janet said quietly. "Initially, our representatives told him they couldn't discuss your accounts without your authorization. But then this arrived." She handed me another document, and my blood turned to ice. It was a forged power of attorney form, supposedly signed by me, granting Trent full access to my financial accounts. "This isn't my signature," I whispered, staring at the crude imitation of my handwriting. "We suspected as much," Janet said. "That's why I called you in. Patty, someone has been planning to gain control of your finances. If this had been processed, they would have had the legal right to move your money wherever they wanted." The room seemed to spin around me. My own son had tried to steal from me. Not just the money for the house, not just the loans that were never repaid, but everything. My life savings, my security, my independence. "There's more," Janet said gently. "We've also discovered that someone has been making inquiries about your life insurance policy, your property deeds, and your existing will." I felt like I was drowning. "My will? Do you have a copy of your current will at home?" I nodded numbly. David and I had updated it after his death, leaving everything to Trent because he was our only child. It had seemed like the natural thing to do at the time. "I think you should check it when you get home," Janet said. "And Patty? I think you should consider whether it still reflects your wishes." The drive home was a blur. I kept thinking about all the times Trent had casually asked about my paperwork, all the occasions when he had volunteered to help me get organized. I had thought he was being thoughtful. Now I realized he had been conducting reconnaissance. My will was exactly where I had left it, in the fireproof safe David had insisted we buy. But as I read through it, I saw things I had missed before. The language was oddly specific about when Trent would gain control of my assets, not just after my death, but if I were ever declared mentally incompetent or unable to manage my own affairs. Had I been stupid enough to sign something like that? I thought back to the day after David's funeral, when Trent had arrived with a lawyer friend of his, saying they needed to update some paperwork to reflect my new status as a widow. I had been so overwhelmed with grief, so grateful that someone was taking care of the details, that I had signed whatever they put in front of me. The lawyer's name was printed at the bottom of the document: Marcus Webb, attorney at law. I had never met him before that day, and I had never seen him since. I called the law office listed on the letterhead. "Webb and Associates," a receptionist answered. "I'd like to speak with Marcus Webb, please. This is regarding some documents he prepared for me." "I'm sorry, but Mr. Webb is no longer with our firm. He was terminated last year for professional misconduct. Could someone else assist you?" Professional misconduct. I hung up without answering. My hands were shaking as I dialed the number for my old friend Eleanor, the only lawyer I knew personally. We had been neighbors when our children were small, and she had helped me with some simple legal matters over the years. "Eleanor," I said when she answered, "I need help. I think my son has been trying to steal from me, and I don't know who to trust." An hour later, Eleanor was sitting in my living room, reading through my will with the focused intensity of someone who knew exactly what to look for. "Patty," she said finally, "this document is a nightmare. If this language were ever enforced, Trent could have you declared incompetent based on almost anything. Forgetting a doctor's appointment, getting confused about dates, even having a bad reaction to medication could be used against you." I felt sick. "Is it legal?" "Technically, yes, if you signed it voluntarily. But the circumstances under which you signed it were questionable at best. You were grieving, you weren't represented by independent counsel, and the attorney who drafted it has since been disbarred for similar schemes." "Schemes?" Eleanor's expression was grim. Marcus Webb made a specialty of helping adult children gain control of their parents' assets. He would draft documents that looked like standard estate planning, but were actually designed to make it easy to declare the parent incompetent and seize their money. The pieces were falling into place with horrifying clarity. The pressure to buy the expensive house, the casual questions about my health and memory, the way Nora would make comments about how forgetful I was becoming, how worried they were about me living alone. They hadn't just been planning to take my money. They had been building a case to take my freedom. "What can I do?" I asked. Eleanor smiled, and it was the first genuinely warm expression I had seen all week. "Quite a lot, actually. First, we're going to draft a new will, one that actually reflects your wishes. Second, we're going to revoke any powers of attorney you may have signed. And third, we're going to make sure your son understands that his little scheme has been discovered." "I want him prosecuted," I said, surprised by the vehemence in my own voice. "Patty, are you sure? He's your son. Even with everything he's done." "Especially because he's my son," I interrupted. "I raised him to know right from wrong. If he chooses to ignore that, he needs to face the consequences." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "Good for you. It's about time someone in your family learned that actions have consequences." As we worked through the afternoon, revising documents and building a case, I felt something I had never experienced before: the satisfaction of fighting back. For too long, I had accepted whatever my family chose to do to me, telling myself that keeping the peace was more important than standing up for myself. But some lines, once crossed, changed everything. That evening, as Eleanor packed up her files, She paused at my front door. "Patty, I have to ask, what made you finally decide to fight back? What was the breaking point?" I thought about Damon's small face at the mansion door, about the word peasant delivered with such casual cruelty, about Nora's satisfied smirk and Trent's silent complicity. I realized, I said slowly, that I had been so afraid of losing my family that I had forgotten I was supposed to matter too. Eleanor squeezed my hand. "You matter more than you know, and by the time we're finished, your son is going to understand that." After she left, I sat in David's chair and allowed myself to feel the full weight of what I had discovered. My son, the baby I had nursed through fevers and celebrated through achievements, had been planning to steal my life away from me piece by piece. But I wasn't going to let that happen. For the first time in years, I was going to use the strength David had always said I possessed. Tomorrow, I would start building a new life. A life where I mattered, where I was respected, where I was more than just a means to someone else's end. And if my family couldn't accept that version of me, then they weren't really my family at all. 2 weeks after I discovered the extent of their betrayal, they came crawling back. Not with apologies, not with remorse, but with the kind of desperate manipulation that only comes when people realize their meal ticket is about to disappear forever. It started with Damon. I was in my garden, deadheading the last roses of the season, when I heard his small voice calling from the sidewalk. "Grandma Patty, please don't be mad at me." I looked up to see him standing at the edge of my property, his little face streaked with tears, wearing clothes that looked like he had slept in them. Behind him, parked across the street, I could see Nora's car with the windows rolled down. She was watching, waiting to see if her latest strategy would work. My heart clenched. Whatever my feelings toward his parents, Damon was an innocent child caught in the middle of a war he didn't understand. I set down my garden shears and walked to the fence. "I'm not mad at you, sweetheart," I said gently, kneeling down so we were at eye level. "You didn't do anything wrong, but Mommy says you hate us now. She says you took away our house because you don't love us anymore." His voice broke on the last word, and I saw exactly what Nora was doing. She was using her own child as a weapon, breaking his heart to try to break mine. "I love you very much, Damon. But love doesn't mean giving people things they haven't earned, or treating someone badly and expecting them to be happy about it." He wiped his nose with the back of his hand. "Daddy says you're being mean because you're old and sad. He says old people sometimes get confused and make bad decisions." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. They were teaching their 7-year-old son that I was mentally deficient, setting him up to see me as someone whose words couldn't be trusted. "What do you think, Damon? Do I seem confused to you right now?" He studied my face with the serious intensity that children bring to important questions. "No, you seem like Grandma Patty." "That's because I am Grandma Patty. And Grandma Patty makes decisions for good reasons, even when other people don't like those decisions." From across the street, I heard Nora's car door slam. She was getting impatient, probably worried that her script wasn't being followed closely enough. "I have to go," Damon whispered, glancing nervously toward his mother. "But Grandma Patty? I'm sorry about what I said at the house. Mommy told me to say those words, but they made me feel bad inside." And just like that, a 7-year-old child showed more integrity than either of his parents had managed in years. "Thank you for telling me that, sweetheart. That took courage." He gave me a watery smile and ran back to the car. As they drove away, I saw Nora's face in the passenger window, and the fury there was unmistakable. Her plan hadn't worked. 3 days later, Trent showed up at my door. I hadn't seen him since the day at the mansion, and I was shocked by his appearance. He looked like he had aged 5 years in 2 weeks. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair uncombed, and there was a desperate quality to his movements that reminded me of the night terrors he used to have as a child. "Mom," he said when I opened the door, "we need to talk." "No," I replied, "we don't." I started to close the door, but he put his hand against it. Please, 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Against my better judgment, I let him in. He stood in my living room, the place where I had comforted him through heartbreaks and celebrated his successes, and I could see him taking inventory, probably calculating what everything was worth. You look tired, I observed. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Yeah, well, it's been a rough couple of weeks. We've been staying in a motel since we had to move out of the rental. Nora's not handling it well. I'm sure she isn't. Mom, I know you're angry, but think about what you're doing. You're destroying your own family over a misunderstanding. I sat down in David's chair and folded my hands in my lap. Tell me about the power of attorney, Trent. The color drained from his face. What power of attorney? The one you forged, the one that would have given you control over all my money. For a moment, he just stood there, opening and closing his mouth like a fish gasping for air. Then, to my amazement, he tried to lie. I don't know what you're talking about. Someone must have made a mistake at the bank. The bank has recordings of you calling 17 times, trying to access my accounts. They have copies of documents with my forged signature, and I know about Marcus Webb. That name hit him like a physical blow. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time since he was a teenager, I saw my son look genuinely ashamed. How did you find out about Marcus? It doesn't matter how. What matters is that you tried to steal from me. Your own mother. It wasn't stealing, he said quickly, desperately. It was just planning ahead, making sure your affairs were in order. Nora was worried about you living alone, making financial decisions without anyone to help you. Stop. My voice cut through his excuses like a blade. Just stop. I know exactly what you were planning, and it had nothing to do with helping me. He was quiet for a long moment, and when he looked at me again, I saw something I had never seen before in my son's eyes. Hatred. You're going to regret this, he said quietly. You think you're so smart, so independent, but you're just a lonely old woman with no one left who cares about you. If that's true, I replied evenly, then what does that say about the son I raised? He flinched as if I had slapped him. I tried to give you everything, he continued, his voice rising. A good childhood, a college education, financial support whenever you needed it. And this is how you repay me? By humiliating me in front of my wife and child? The audacity of it was breathtaking. You tried to give me everything? Trent, I worked 3 jobs to put you through college. I gave you the down payment for your first house. I've been supporting your family for years. What exactly did you give me? I gave you purpose, he shouted. I gave you a reason to get up in the morning. Without us, what do you have? What's the point of your life without your family? And there it was, the truth that had been hiding behind all the manipulation and fake concern. In his mind, I existed solely to serve his needs. My money, my time, my life itself had no value except as it related to him. Get out, I said quietly. Mom, get out of my house, now. He stood there for a moment longer, probably calculating whether there was any argument left that might work. But something in my expression must have convinced him that this particular well had run dry. Fine, he said, walking toward the door. But don't come crying to us when you realize what you've thrown away. Don't expect us to take care of you when you're sick and alone and have no one left. I wouldn't dream of it, I replied. After he left, I locked the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding. The conversation had been brutal, but also liberating. For the first time, we had both said exactly what we meant. There were no more illusions to maintain, no more pretenses to honor. That evening, I called Eleanor and told her about Trent's visit. He's getting desperate, she said. That's actually a good sign for us. Desperate people make mistakes. What do you mean? I've been doing some research into your son's financial situation. Did you know he owes over $60,000 in credit card debt? And that he's been unemployed for the past 3 months? I nearly dropped the phone. Unemployed? But he said he was fired from his marketing job for falsifying expense reports. Apparently, this isn't his first brush with financial misconduct. Everything was clicking into place. The urgency about the house purchase, the pressure to make decisions quickly, the elaborate planning around my finances. They hadn't just wanted my money for a better lifestyle, they had needed it to avoid financial ruin. There's something else, Eleanor continued. I've been in touch with the district attorney's office about the forged documents. They're very interested in pursuing charges. Good, I said, and I meant it. Patty, are you absolutely sure about this? Once we move forward, there's no going back. Your relationship with your son will be over. I looked around my peaceful living room, thought about the relief I had felt over the past 2 weeks, the absence of guilt and obligation and constant demands. Eleanor, I said, I think that relationship was over a long time ago. I was just too afraid to admit it. The next morning, I received one final text message from Nora. You're a bitter old woman who will die alone. I hope you're happy with your choice. I read it twice, then deleted it. She was wrong about me being bitter. For the first time in years, I felt nothing but peace. But she was right about one thing. I was happy with my choice. 6 months later, I stood on the deck of a cruise ship watching the sunset over the Mediterranean, a glass of wine in my hand, and the salt breeze in my hair. For the first time in my adult life, I was traveling not because someone else needed something, not because I was solving a crisis or fulfilling an obligation, but simply because I wanted to see the world. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. The first few weeks after cutting ties with Trent had been difficult, filled with doubt and the kind of deep loneliness that comes from dismantling a life you've spent decades building. There were moments when I almost picked up the phone, almost convinced myself that maybe I had been too harsh, too unforgiving, but then I would remember Damon's small face at the mansion door, or Trent's voice when he told me I should be grateful for the purpose his existence gave my life, and the doubt would evaporate. Eleanor had been right about desperate people making mistakes. Trent's financial situation had continued to deteriorate, and in his panic, he had tried to use one of the forged documents to access my accounts directly. The bank's security cameras had captured everything, and the district attorney's office had been very interested indeed. He was currently serving 18 months in minimum security prison for fraud and forgery. Nora had filed for divorce the moment his conviction became public, taking Damon and moving back to her mother's house in California. The last I heard, she was working at a department store makeup counter, a far cry from the elite lifestyle she had always craved. I felt sorry for Damon, caught in the wreckage of his parents' choices. But Eleanor had helped me set up a trust fund for his education, one that would be available when he turned 18, with provisions that neither of his parents could touch. It was my way of loving him without enabling them. The cruise ship was filled with people like me, widows and widowers, retirees, folks who had spent decades caring for others and were finally learning to care for themselves. I had made friends with a group of women from various backgrounds, all of us discovering that life after 70 could be an adventure rather than an ending. Patty, called Margaret, a retired teacher from Ohio who had become my closest companion on the ship. Come join us. Roberto is about to tell us about tomorrow's shore excursion in Rome. Roberto was our tour guide, a charming Italian man in his 60s who had been widowed 3 years earlier and decided to spend his retirement showing other seniors the beauty of his homeland. He was passionate about history, patient with our questions, and had the kind of gentle humor that made even the most hesitant traveler feel confident. As I walked over to join the group, I caught my reflection in the ship's windows and barely recognized myself. My hair, which I had kept in the same practical style for 30 years, was now cut in a flattering bob that framed my face. I was wearing a flowing sundress in a shade of turquoise that David used to say brought out my eyes. Most importantly, I was smiling, really smiling, in a way I hadn't done since before David's death. "So tomorrow," Roberto was saying in his accented English, "we will visit the Vatican in the morning, and then I will take you to a little restaurant my family has run for 4 generations. You will taste real Roman cuisine, not the tourist version." The women around me chatted excitedly about the plans, and I found myself caught up in their enthusiasm. When was the last time I had looked forward to something just for the joy of it? After the group dispersed, Margaret lingered beside me at the ship's railing. "You seem different today," she observed. "Lighter somehow." I had told her some of my story during our long conversations over dinner and afternoon wine. She was a good listener, and she had shared her own tale of a daughter who had expected her to babysit grandchildren for free while working full-time as a teacher, never acknowledging the sacrifice involved. "I got a letter today," I said, pulling the envelope from my purse. "From my son." Margaret's eyebrows rose. "The one in prison?" I nodded. The letter had been waiting for me at the ship's communications center, forwarded from my address back home. I had debated whether to open it, but curiosity had won out. "What did he say?" I unfolded the single page and read aloud. "Mom, I've had a lot of time to think, and I realize now that I made mistakes. I was selfish and I hurt you, and I'm sorry for that. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted you to know that I understand why you did what you did. You were right to protect yourself. I hope someday you can forgive me, and maybe we can start over. I love you. Trent." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel about that?" I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. Relieved, I think. For the first time, he actually sounds like the son I tried to raise. "Are you going to write back?" I watched the waves rolling away from the ship, carrying us toward new horizons. Maybe. Someday. But not because I feel obligated to, and not because I'm hoping to fix everything. If I write back, it will be because I choose to, on my own terms. Good for you. That evening, I sat in my small but comfortable cabin, working on a letter of my own. Not to Trent, but to Damon. His 9th birthday was coming up, and I wanted him to know that his grandmother was thinking of him, even if we couldn't be together. I wrote about the places I was visiting, the people I was meeting, the joy of discovering that life had many chapters still to be written. I told him about his grandfather David, and how much they would have liked each other. I included photos from my travels, hoping that someday he would understand that there was a whole world beyond the small, bitter universe his parents had created. I ended the letter with a promise that when he was older, when he was ready to make his own choices about relationships and family, I would be here if he wanted to find me. I sealed the letter and prepared to mail it to his school, where he would receive it without his mother's interference. The next morning, as our ship docked in Rome, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation for the unknown. I had no idea what the day would bring, no schedule to keep except my own desires, no one to please except myself. Roberto met our group at the gangway, his face bright with enthusiasm. "Ladies," he said with a bow, "are you ready for an adventure?" As we walked through the ancient streets of Rome, I thought about the woman I had been a year ago, tired, taken for granted, living for other people's approval. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone I had known once but had left behind like an old coat that no longer fit. Standing in St. Peter's Basilica, surrounded by centuries of art and faith and human achievement, I made a decision. When this cruise ended, I wasn't going back to my old life of quiet solitude and careful budgeting. I was going to keep traveling, keep meeting people, keep discovering what brought me joy. I had enough money now, with the $800,000 I hadn't spent on a house for ungrateful relatives. I had good health, a curious mind, and for the first time in my adult life, complete freedom to choose how I spent my days. Margaret found me sitting quietly in a pew, taking in the magnificent ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. "Penny for your thoughts," she whispered. I smiled and squeezed her hand. "I was just thinking about how grateful I am." "For what?" I considered the question seriously. For having the courage to choose myself. For learning that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. As we left the Vatican and walked toward Roberto's family restaurant, I felt David's presence beside me, not as a weight of grief, but as a warm reminder of what real love felt like. He would have been proud of me, I realized. Proud that I had finally learned to value myself the way he had always valued me. That evening, as I sat around a table with my new friends, sharing stories and laughter over incredible food and wine, I realized that I had found something I hadn't even known I was looking for: a chosen family. People who appreciated me not for what I could give them, but for who I was. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number, but I didn't check it. Whatever crisis or demand or manipulation it might contain could wait. For the first time in my life, I was living in the moment, and that moment was beautiful. The woman who had once stood humiliated at a mansion door, dismissed by her own family as unworthy of their presence, was gone. In her place was someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more free. I was 66 years old, and my real life was just beginning. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.